All right, guys. Um, we are gonna start out our late stream. Good evening, Stony Progressives. Let's get high and watch some news. Gonna start us out with a little history lesson sent to us from someone else, and then we will get into the subjects of the night. But our history lesson will set us up. No, that's not it. Here we go. Let's blaze one up, guys.
The world's attention is on the border between Russia and Ukraine, the site of the biggest military buildup in Europe since the Cold War. Russia has already annexed Crimea, part of Ukrainian territory, and plunged Donbass in Ukraine's southeast into a separate conflict.
Our allies and partners are ready to impose severe cost and significant harm on Russia and the Russian economy.
If Russia changes borders again by force, this will be a challenge to whole of European security.
But how did Ukraine become a flashpoint between Russia and the West? And why won't Russia leave Ukraine alone?
I don't think that Putin's finished with Ukraine. I don't think he will leave Ukraine unmolested.
Vladimir Putin disputes whether a border between Russia and Ukraine should exist.
Мы не просто близкие соседи. Мы фактически, как я уже много раз говорил, один народ.
He says that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, and has claimed that Ukraine isn't a state, but Ukraine is proud of its independence.
Мы молода країна.
Russia and Ukraine do have a shared ancestry. A union between Moscow and Kiev in the 17th century formed the base of the Russian Empire. Moscow considers Kiev the cradle of its civilization and its faith. Over the centuries since, the two countries have been intimately connected. Ukraine was a cornerstone of the Soviet Union until the bloc collapsed in 1991. At the time, Ukrainian independence went hand in hand with a new democratic Russia.
Ukraine, in many ways, set the example for Russia's own independence
Those are us. I am George. We're all George. So the White House just held a press conference. In fact, the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan just announced that the invasion of Ukraine is imminent. It's around the corner. Desire that there's going to be a call taking place tomorrow between President Biden and and Vladimir Putin. That's going to be happening tomorrow. And
of Russian escalation, including new forces arriving at the Ukrainian border. As we've said before, we are in the window when an invasion could begin at any time, should Vladimir Putin decide to order it. I will not comment on the details of our intelligence information, but I do want to be clear. It could begin during the Olympics, despite a lot of speculation that it would only happen after the Olympics. As we've said before, we are ready either way. We are ready to continue results-oriented diplomacy that addresses the security concerns of the United States, Russia, and Europe, consistent with our values and with the principle of reciprocity. We've continued to make that clear to Russia in close coordination with our European allies and partners. We are also ready to respond decisively alongside those allies and partners should Russia choose to take military action. Our response would include severe economic sanctions, with similar packages imposed by the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and other countries. It would also include changes to NATO and American force posture along the eastern flank of NATO, and it would include continued support to Ukraine. The President held a secure video conference today with key allies and partners to coordinate our approach to this crisis. The participants were the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Poland, Romania, the Secretary General of NATO, and the Presidents of the European Union. We have achieved a remarkable level of unity and common purpose from the broad strategy down to the technical details. If Russia proceeds, its long-term power and influence will be diminished, not enhanced, by an invasion. It will face a more determined transatlantic community. It will have to make more concessions to China. It will face massive pressure on its economy and export controls that will erode its defense industrial base. And it will face a wave of condemnation from around the world. If, on the other hand, Russia truly seeks a diplomatic outcome, it should not only say so, it should pursue that diplomatic outcome. We are prepared to do that. We have put concrete proposals on the table. They are now out there for the world to see. We're prepared to engage on them and to discuss the principles and parameters of European security with our European partners and with Russia. Whatever happens next, the West is more united than it's been in years. NATO has been strengthened. The alliance is more cohesive, more purposeful, more dynamic than at any time in recent memory. In terms of immediate next steps, President Biden and his team will remain in close contact with our allies and partners to coordinate both on the potential for diplomacy and on any response that is necessary should Putin decide to order military action. We are continuing to reduce the size of our embassy footprint in Kyiv, and I now want to take a moment to echo what both President Biden and Secretary Blinken have already said. We encourage all American citizens who remain in Ukraine to depart immediately. We want to be crystal clear on this point. Any American in Ukraine should leave as soon as possible, and in any event, in the next 24 to 48 hours. We obviously cannot predict the future. We don't know exactly what is going to happen, but the risk is now high enough, and the threat is now immediate enough, that this is what prudence demands. If you stay, you are assuming risk, with no guarantee that there will be any other opportunity to leave, and no prospect of a U.S. military evacuation in the event of a Russian invasion. If a Russian attack on Ukraine proceeds, it is likely to begin with aerial bombing and missile attacks that could obviously kill civilians without regard to their nationality. A subsequent ground invasion would involve the onslaught of a massive force. With virtually no notice, communications to arrange a departure could be severed and commercial transit halted. No one would be able to count on air or rail or road departures once military action got underway. Now again, I'm not standing here and saying what is going to happen or not happen. I'm only standing here to say that the risk is now high enough and the threat is immediate enough that prudence demands that it is the time to leave now. While commercial options and commercial rail and air service exist, while the roads are open. The president will not be putting the lives of our men and women in left now, but chose not to. So we are asking people to make the responsible choice. With that, I'm happy to take your questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake.
I got volume. Everything's on. Just unable to work from software to YouTube, I guess. But I can still stream. Bluntness. She's not hilarious, but she's pretty great. And I think today, my first day actually watching live stream, this was my favorite clip.
But what
And
the point he was making is that as recently as 2020, as we know, the former president was trying to work with local officials to overturn the vote count and not have ballots counted. And we have to be very eyes wide open about that and clear-eyed that that is the intention, potentially of him.
Blaze went
and
up and
certainly
catch
of
news
members of his
clips.
party.
I got one more on the same subject.
Because yesterday, obviously, voting rights hit a wall in Congress right now without the votes for the filibuster rules to be changed. And given the conversation you just had about other avenues that could be taken, if there are no changes in terms of voting rights legislation going forward, the president does still feel confident that the elections this fall will be legitimate.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Just following up real quick on this legislative stuff. Yesterday, the president blamed Republicans for blocking his agenda, called them obstructionists, but he admitted that he hadn't reached out to any on the issue of voting rights. So now, given where things stand with these two bills, will he be reaching out to any Republicans, seeing that this bipartisan effort on the Electoral Count Act might end up being the only game in town on that?
Well, we don't accept that, but I will also say
Ukraine. Ahead of the president's meeting with the mayor's conference tomorrow, some of the biggest headlines this week have been the New York City woman being pushed to her death in a subway, the woman in LA being murdered allegedly by a career criminal. I saw this morning that. Real quick question on crime, then I want to ask about Ukraine. Ahead of the president's meeting with the
on Fox.
Yes, on Fox. Thank you for joining us. That he wants to fund police and make clear that crime is prosecutors. The White House is making to show that it takes crime.
Every time he's spoken about this.
It's a long-winded roundabout.
Parts of the country.
Story, what they're seeing and hearing is about to happen. And the president's comments last night seemed to corroborate that to a certain degree, where he said, my guess is Putin will move in. So why wouldn't the U.S. introduce sort of level one sanctions as proactive deterrents and then remove them if Russia de-escalates?
Wait,
Hey, is this Congressman Golden?
Sure is.
Hey, Congressman, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Yourself?
I am doing well. I really appreciate you making some time to talk to us about this. I know it's been a long process so far, and I know it's not over. So, do you want to just kind of launch right into it?
Sure. I mean, I think you just got it spot on. The process is not over yet. This bill is going to go forward to the United States Senate. They're surely going to debate it. I have no doubt they will make some changes to it, at which point, if they pass it, it will come back to the House. I am advocating strongly that when this bill gets to the Senate, they remove a big tax break for millionaires, $285 billion in total. That is a larger cost than any other provision in this bill. It is more in tax breaks for millionaires than assistance for seniors with home health care, more than we would give assistance to middle-class families for child care or for the child tax credit, which is only for a year. This tax break for millionaires is over the next 5 years. This is a huge flaw in the bill, and one that is late developing. It was only inserted into the bill about a little over a week ago. I think it was a terrible policy decision and even worse politics.
So, Congressman, let me ask you this: if the final version comes back to the House and it still includes the SALT, as it's called, will that be a tipping point for you? Will you not vote for it if it still includes the SALT provision?
I'm always careful not to, tie myself into knots here, Chris, because there's ways to make fixes to this SALT deduction. That would make sure that it truly would only benefit middle-class households. You could say, you know what, this cap on deductions, we're going to get rid of that cap for families making less than, insert whatever you think, Chris, it makes for a middle-class, household. It might be different if you're living in Maine as opposed to somewhere in New York City, but certainly I think we can all agree that we shouldn't be giving this tax benefit to 2/3 of millionaires in this country. And they are going to benefit by tens of thousands of dollars, while middle-class households that are impacted by this deduction cap are generally impacted by like $20 to a couple of $100. So you can see how big that difference is. So there's ways that the deduction could remain in the bill to the benefit of those middle-class families without giving this big tax break to millionaires. So I got to wait and see what the Senate does, and that's true of the entire bill. I always think it's a mistake, particularly on very large bills like this, to make commitments before the process is played out and you know exactly what it is that you're voting for. There's a lot I like in this bill. There's still some big problems with it.
Well, totally understand that point of view. So then let me ask you this: what are the parts that you would be averse to the Senate removing? Would it be some of the climate change provisions? Would it be the universal pre-K? What are those provisions that you say are a must keep?
To be honest, I really love the pre-K provision. I think that would be great for Maine, great for the entire country. I like the Medicare negotiations. This is going to have the federal government negotiating with pharmaceutical companies for lower drug prices for our Medicare beneficiaries. It also will cap our seniors
We're going to be talking about misinformation, which I'm not sure if it's a problem or not. I haven't heard much about it recently. But first, we're going to talk about last week's episode, which was a big pig fuck.
Y'all,
I'm a professional.
Pig fuck is a great term.
Last week we were talking about Spotify and Joe Rogan and some other things, and I had some comments on it. I thought, well, geez, I'm always someone who prefers engagement, and generally the commentary back from it I thought was very measured.
We essentially just sat back and waited for it to explode all over.
Amongst the fuck you, I'm done with you, Stewart, I'll never forgive you for XYZ, you're off the rails, old man, go away. I thought there was some interesting stuff, if you sifted through it, that was constructive. And I think some people made the point that economic pressure is also just another pressure point that you can apply to misinformation. You know, I think one of the greatest issues that we will face is that nexus of misinformation and disinformation. And how do you deal with it on a corporate level, on a personal level? So I thought to myself, well, geez, what if I get somebody who's studied this sort of thing, who is a doctor,
who knows something about it?
That's right. And so that is Jay Jordan. And so Jay is a doctor. And we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Joan Donovan. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Please tell me, what is your role at the Harvard Kennedy School, Shorenstein Center?
Yeah, at the Shorenstein Center, I'm the research director, and I'm also the director of the Technology and Social Change Project. So I've been researching the internet for about a decade. I've been at Harvard about 3 years now, and I look at misinformation, disinformation, media manipulation campaigns, and I look at how the internet is a tool, just like any other, for bringing about the world you want to live in.
Doctor, you are the Rosetta Stone. And we appreciate you being here because this is the key to the future. So, did you have a chance to listen at all to the podcast from last week?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I did.
What in your opinion did you feel like we got right, and what did we get wrong? And was the reaction to it in your mind expected, knowing what you know of how the internet is where nuance goes to die?
Yes, and the ivory tower is also where knowledge goes to die. So we are very much
nicely done, Professor.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, the problem is this, which is that you know, people who are experts, doctors, have a really hard time communicating, getting their message out there. And so in this moment, when I was listening to what you were struggling with, there were a couple of key things that I think some definitions might help with. To sound too pedantic here, but when we talk about misinformation in this field, we really are talking about information that is shared where people don't know its veracity or its accuracy. So Joe Rogan really falls into the misinformation camp of someone who's just asking questions, has some ideas. He wants to hear from a range of different people, but the misinformation is never error corrected, right? Like a good editorial magazine or even a newspaper is going to have a way to do corrections that the next day you're going to hear, hey, you know, we printed this was totally wrong. But the internet has really facilitated this flow of information where error correction just never happens. And the way in which
how does that differ from disinformation?
That's a campaign or an operation where you have people who are purposeful. There is intent there, and which gets all the lawyers really rankled because they're like, how can you know what's in a man's heart? But we know Rudy Giuliani was really out here to try to, upset the outcome of the election. He said as much, and then there's a lot of background information that help us make sense of it. But disinformation, to put it simply, is either it's sharing inaccurate information for mostly political ends and sometimes financial
and with
ends.
Purpose.
With real purpose and veracity and planning. But when we talk about like digital disinformation, this is different than when you would say something like, the way in which we handled the question around weapons of mass destruction in the 90s, where, politicians really had hoaxed some of the journalists into believing a state-sponsored campaign.
Right.
Digital
By the way, I just want to point out very quickly,
Yeah.
when you started talking about disinformation, Doctor, Jay Jordan disappeared from the program. He's there audio-wise, but all of a sudden his video has gone out, which is a very convenient...
They don't want us to talk about this, John. It's what they don't want us to know.
That is exactly my point. I don't want to...
It's in that conjuring of the they that is where we start to look around for evidence of who the they is.
Dr. Donovan, the reason this is so funny is because I didn't know that I disappeared. So you telling me I might just be a bad actor, but not even know that I'm spreading misinformation. I'm just hitting retweet.
But that's the my uncle said it on Facebook kind of excuse, right? He's spreading misinformation.
Right.
What changes it for someone like Rogan is it's his brand. It's controversy is his brand. Controversial conversations is what Spotify paid $100 million for. Right. And Spotify wants to reject the fact that they're a publisher. And in this moment of the digital revolution that we're going through, to call yourself a platform actually means a very specific thing, where Spotify wants all the benefits of being called a platform, where there's a lot of user-generated content, which creates a lot of chaos and opportunities for disinformation and misinformation. But they really knew what they were getting. All of these problems were there when Rogan was primarily using YouTube as a means to gather an audience.
So here's where I run into trouble, and here's why I believe. Well, first of all, I know Joe, so I think you always grant more understanding and nuance to people you know, because you know them as more three-dimensionally than what that appearance is. So, and we always demonize those that we maybe feel alien to us. So that goes right in there. I'm already guilty of a bias, right? Mm-hmm. But the second part of it, where I run into trouble, is the thing you just said. You talked about they want the benefit, but they don't want the accountability. And you mentioned weapons of mass destruction, and it reminded me, the New York Times, right, was a giant purveyor of misinformation and disinformation. I don't know that the Times was purposeful, but misinformation. And that's as vaunted a media organization as you can find, but there was no accountability for them. And I think where I get nervous is in the run-up to the Iraq War and in the prosecution of the Iraq War, I was very vocal, and sometimes cursed about that. But the mainstream view, the New York Times, was they have weapons of mass destruction. They have these tubes that can only be used for nuclear war. Saddam Hussein is this, he's that. Couldn't I have gone down and fallen down this if Viacom or Comedy Central had wanted to censor me or had wanted to take me out the pot? Look, I'm not owed a platform. Nobody is. So it's not a First Amendment issue. It's not any of that. We're really, once you're in bed with a corporation, the deal is they have to sell enough beer and you get to do what you want. Right. But my point is, these are shifting sands. And I think I get concerned with, well, who gets to decide what that, I mean, in the Iraq War, I was on the side of what you would think on the mainstream is misinformation. I was promoting what they would call misinformation. But it turned out to be right years later, and the establishment media was wrong. And not only were they wrong, in some respects, you could make the case that they enabled a war that killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and never paid a price for it and never had accountability. And just having an ombudsman print a retraction, to me, is an accountability. So it's very easy to attack Rogan, and I'm not saying that that's not your right and that there aren't things there to talk about. But what I'm saying is, let's be careful because the sands can shift.
Yeah. People are in a new information ecosystem and they're trying their best. But that's the thing about these platforms over the years is that we've asked no accountability from them. They're not built by librarians who are actual.
Yeah, I'm done with her. Let's go on to somebody else annoying, huh? This is fun. I think I have it right here.
Evacuation of Americans in the course.
It's not actually an evacuation, to be clear. American citizens can depart Ukraine. There are means of departing Ukraine. This is not a country where we are at war, where we have tens of thousands of troops who have been fighting a war for 20 years, so it's incredibly different.
Correct, you are correct in that. But it's the second time we've urged American citizens to get out of the country.
Actually, we've urged American citizens to depart a number of times, and that is. Well, I think this, but let me finish here because I think it's important for people to understand. We urged American citizens to depart Kazakhstan. We urged American citizens to depart Ethiopia. This is a responsibility that the State Department and our diplomats who are serving there and serving around the world take on to keep American citizens safe. And it may not be front and center on the news in the United States, but those are conflict areas and zones where we are constantly monitoring.
But these are the two major events that have happened under this administration. And
I would say the people in Ethiopia would differ with that, as would the people in Kazakhstan or other parts of the world where they have been under dangerous circumstances, and they look to the United States to provide up-to-date information of their safety and security in the country.
The President has frequently talked about getting out of Afghanistan as a major event. It has impacted his polling. This is a current event that is underway. The question is, what does the administration say to critics who are looking at these two events and questioning this administration's foreign policy approach?
Who is questioning us? Give me
plenty of Republicans.
Like who?
I could name off any number of Republicans.
I'd love to know a name.
Come at me, bro.
Mitch McConnell.
Okay. Well, here's what I would say to Mr. McConnell. The president ended a 20-year war in Afghanistan, a war that had cost us thousands of American lives, billions, trillions of dollars.
I don't know how the name helped at all.
Enterprise.
That was my,
yeah.
Question on inflation, since this is the first time we've had a briefing since those numbers came out. The president has said the administration is going to continue to be all hands on deck to try and bring prices back down. Can you give us a sense of what that really looks like? Because, you've pointed many times to parts of the Build Back Better agenda. That remains stalled. In fact, one of Senator Manchin's big objections to the bill was the high rate of inflation. So if the Build Back Better plan sort of remains at this impasse, what's plan B to try and bring down some of these costs?
Well, there's a couple steps that the president is very focused on as it relates to addressing inflation. One, I would note that economists in the Federal Reserve still predict that inflation will come down, will moderate over the course of the year. And the president has also said that he supports the steps that the Federal Reserve, an independent body, has announced about recalibrating over the course of the coming months. And he's obviously nominated a number of individuals to fill the board, which is an essential part of addressing this. But I would also note beyond that, how the president really looks at this is how you're.
I will also note when she talks with her hands, she's usually really, really trying to not say anything. That's usually how I see it.
Addressing core costs for the American people. So you referenced the Build Back Better plan. First, we believe there's a path forward, and the president's going to continue to fight for it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone to Virginia earlier this week and talked about negotiating the price of prescription drugs. So his view is that in order to address costs that have been affecting inflation, but also infecting families for many decades, the cost of prescription drugs, the cost of childcare, we need to move that forward. But it's not just that. We also need to address supply chains in the short term at the ports, rebuild our manufacturing infrastructure, make sure that we are implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law and continuing to press for the competitiveness legislation that will help ensure we have funding for chips for manufacturing of cars here in the United States. And you've also heard him talk a fair amount about promoting competition, and that addresses issues like we've seen price increases in the meat industry and others, and that will help bring down costs for Americans. So there is certainly a significant and important, a vital role that the Federal Reserve plays. They are independent. He wants that board to be completely filled, but there are a number of other steps we are working to take to lower costs for the American people.
And just one follow-up on the question about the embassy in Kyiv.
Yeah.
You've said that you're continuing to reduce the size of the embassy. To be clear, you're not talking about closing the embassy just yet. So what size are we talking about? How much of a reduction here?
I can check with the State Department. It's a good question, but they really have.
It's a good question. I don't know. But the inflation question was the one I wanted to watch her tap dance around. Super exciting stuff. So let's move on to our protests and rallies of the day, guys. Let's get that in. It shouldn't be any problem. It's local news. Usually don't have a problem with local news. So let's give it a shot. This is Amir Rice today. Students have staged a statewide walkout for the protests.
Cotton out of your ears. You robbed us of generations. The Locke family now among the unfortunate group of families impacted forever by police violence. Others have also joined their fight for police reform. Amir Locke's death has prompted a call to action from local high school students. More than 1,000 students participated in a statewide walkout and march on Tuesday afternoon in Minnesota to protest.